attachment theory. Where did it all start? Well, it started with John Bowlby, and if I'm saying his last name correct. And John was born in London. He was born to an aristocratic family. His father was a surgeon to the king's household. And so I think this afforded John the ability to study whatever he wanted. So he studied psychology, he studied medicine, and he studied psychoanalysis. And really, attachment theory didn't come about till he was serving in World War II. And during World War II, he noticed that the mass evacuations really led to the disruption of psychological development for children when they were taken away from their families and they were put in these orphanages. Of course, some of it couldn't. You're at war, so if your parents die, where else are you going to be, right? It's not like they could help not putting these kids there. But during this time, John had a desire to understand the profound emotional bond between children and their caregivers and how disruptions to this bond affect psychological development. Psychological development is huge. And at the time, there were a couple of theorists already out there, and really just behavioral theorists. And one of them suggested that children bonded with caregivers primarily because of their role in satisfying physical needs, such as feeding. But here, John comes along and he wants to challenge this theory. He wants to assert that the bond was based on emotional connection and a sense of security, not merely physical survival. So if you think about it, this is World War II, so decades ago, right, that John had first come about the whole attachment theory and started to try to push it. And here we are today, where we're a more evolved society. However, we still don't monitor psychological development. The only time I think we monitor it is if, one, we do research, or two, your kids are messing up and they're in the court, and now the court's going to step in and they're going to say something and they're going to figure out what's going on. And do parents need parenting class to help them with their kids? Or, of course, if as parents you get into trouble with drugs or alcohol or whatever, and you have kids, and courts again will step in and they'll see what do we need to do to help the family and their psychological development as a family as a whole, and as the children, where their needs best met. And the only real things that I think perhaps we monitor per se is when you divorce somebody and you have children, the divorce decree will include really two things that are innate for children. And the number one is parent time. They're allowed parent time with each parent, irregardless of how you view the other parent. It is just a right that a child has. And two is financial support from each parent. That is, again, another innate right that a child has. So if a child is born into this world, they have these rights. Because obviously they're not making money on their own, right? They can't leave the house at the age of 10 and get a full-time job and meet all their needs. It really does depend on their parents. And the court understands that. And there is another thing that I normally see in these court documents, and that is that each parent is not allowed to talk bad about the other parent in front of the child. And again, I think this has to do with psychological development and the child's psyche. And of course, it has to do with the way the child sees the other parent. We don't want to have the child view the other parent poorly just because you two can't get along for whatever reason. Now, of course, this doesn't supersede abuse or whatever. So, I'm not trying to say if that one parent's doing that, then we should ignore that, of course. But we really do not force parents to take parenting classes when they get pregnant. And we really do not follow a child's development unless you're in a research project or an event like World War II happens and people are there to actually see in real time how this affects people. And what John understood and what he saw was So he studied the orphanages, right, in the hospitals, where parents weren't allowed even overnight to be with the kids, and how this affected children. He saw where physical needs were met, but emotional and social needs were neglected. And he noticed that children in such environments often exhibited emotional detachment, developmental delays, and social withdrawal, leading him to believe that emotional bonds were essential as food and water. I think if you think about yourself, this makes total sense, right? We need connection. Kids need connection as well. And John just highlighted the importance of stable, nurturing caregiving for a child's development, and how important that really is, and how that led to the attachment theory, and how an event can help us in real time learn about these things. And I think we'll be learning about some stuff with the California fires if we bring it back to, events that occur, whether naturally or by man. It really gives us the opportunity to understand and develop new theories, and to develop new ways to help people move forward in life, whether that's kids or adults. But I wanted to bring up an interesting fact about George Orwell and his 1984 book, because it's a really huge book. I've heard about it. I haven't read it. It doesn't really interest me per se, but I do know a little bit about it from what I've read online. And so the body keeps the score. So I was reading this book, and the author of this book has met John, which is amazing, because it would be amazing to meet any of these researchers, I think, because they have just done so much for psychology and the family and children and interactions. And so this author met John, and this is what John had to say about George Orwell and his 1984 book. So he said that just such boarding school experiences, so George was put into a boarding school at a young age to prepare him for other schooling. He thought inspired George Orwell's novel 1984, which brilliantly expresses how human beings may be induced to sacrifice everything they hold dear and true, including the sense of self, for the sale of being loved and approved of by someone in a position of authority. So let's just tie that into attachment theory, right? Like, you have George writing this book about totalitarian, can't speak sometimes, which really is about World War II and Hitler, and how people clung on to Hitler so quickly and so fast, and really bought into his ideas, which ended up sacrificing thousands of lives and led thousands of children to be orphaned. Because not only did we have a war because of this and people died in the war, but we have a group of people that are basically being executed for who they are. And if that doesn't spark attachment theory in people, right? Attachment issues, I don't know what would. I mean, not only do you have a traumatic event, but you're ripped apart from your parents. And George Orwell has another book, Animal Farm, on the concept of war again and propaganda. But if we do not create healthy, secure attachments in our children, they will seek these out in other things. And we should already know that as parents. So, right, they'll seek them out in sex, drugs, gangs, violence. I don't know if violence, but sex, drugs, gangs. All those things that we don't want kids to seek things out, they will seek it out in connection. They will seek it out to forget. They will seek it out in any way they can, because they don't understand what they truly need. And sometimes it's really hard to give our kids secure attachment, because sometimes we don't understand that even the littlest things, like staring at our screens for hours on end, or playing a video game for hours on end and not focusing on our kids for that time, can affect them into adulthood. It can leave them feeling lonely, detached, like they're not important. And so it really is important that we set things down and we set time aside for real connection with our kids, wholesome connection. And we can do that a few times during the day: before school check-in, after school hangout, right? Weekly ventures, nightly dinners. There's so much we can do to connect with our kids. So hopefully we're not raising kids with serious attachment issues. But I think if we don't check ourselves and check our social media usage and video games, that we are doing what a war could do in real time. We are developing attachment theories in our children that are unhealthy. And maybe it's because we have unhealthy attachments and we haven't worked on them yet. So anyways, I find this interesting. I've got some more to talk about when it comes to it. Hopefully you enjoyed it. But I really do want to know your thoughts on this. Do you yourself research attachment issues? Do you know about attachment theories? What are your thoughts about it? Is there something new that you didn't understand? Just leave a comment and let me know.